Hello and welcome to The Dirt and the Divine. I'm Krisha Young, executive growth strategist, author, and advocate for living a truly aligned and unapologetic life. This podcast is rooted in the belief that every beautiful life grows from both the messy and the magnificent. Here we share raw, real stories of people who faced life's hardest moments, took radical responsibility, and chose joy and alignment over avoidance. My hope is that you hear these conversations and think, wow, if they made it through and found happiness, so can I. This space is about honoring both the dirt and the divine because together they shape a life worth living. Please note that this podcast is for general discussion only and is not in any way, shape, or form a substitute for therapy, legal, or professional advice. Now let's dive in. So today, we've got a special guest here, Devi Ward Erickson. She is a board certified clinical sexologist and the founder of the world's first and only government accredited school and master's degree in authentic Tantra. We're going to be talking about Tantra today. I'm so excited. She's a certified Tantra healer, meditation instructor, Reiki practitioner, and a longtime Vajrayana Tantra practitioner. I hope I said that right. Devi is also the host of the podcast Sex is Medicine, and author of multiple books, including Shake Your Soul Song and Tantra is Medicine. Her work has been featured on VH1's Couples Retreat, Cosmopolitan, Ebony, Men's Health, and more. There's so much more here. So much more. Hello, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you. So I put out an ask on Facebook a few weeks ago, and I was like, okay, I really want to interview some experts in Tantra because for me, Tantra has been something that's been woven into my life through I was introduced through Kundalini, Tantra Kundalini, and it just like really reshaped how I showed up in the world, how I was dealing with my own emotional stuff, how I tapped more in at an even deeper level into my feminine and started balancing out my masculine sides within myself. And I'm just like such a lover of that of it. However, there's so many different iterations and sects, sects of it, and it's not just about sex. So
No.
let's get that clear out the gate. But we're going to talk about that in a minute. And so you were one of the people that raised their hands to talk about this. And in our pre-interview, I was just like, oh my gosh, okay, yes, like let's get on here, let's talk about this. Your experience is vast, and we're going to dive into that a little bit as well. Bringing this topic to mainstream, I think, is really important and really needs to start happening like yesterday. You know? So please tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into Tantra, where you are now with it, and then we'll go from there. Thank you for being
Yeah.
here.
Oh, thank you for having me. My journey of discovering Tantra. So before Tantra, I was a monk. I was a monk of the Ashaya order. You can Google that, look it up, Ashaya order, and it's a Hindu-based tradition. And so for a decade, I was a monk for the first 2 to 3 years of my monkhood. I lived in an ashram in North Carolina, and I wore only white and take vows, and I basically committed my life to God, to realizing enlightenment in this lifetime. And then I went through many travels and taught meditation, and eventually ended up in Kauai, Hawaii again. And so I was living on Kauai, and I was running a business. I was teaching sacred erotic dance, which was a fusion for me of my love of dance, which I've been a dancer my whole life, and I was a stripper in Detroit for many years. And so it was a beautiful blend of my passion for dance and my passion for God, my passion for spiritual evolution. So I developed this modality called sacred erotic dance. I was teaching that. I was running another business. After a very bad breakup, I got very sick, and I was recommended to see a natural healthcare practitioner. He wasn't a certified naturopath, but he was a natural healer, and he worked with Chinese medicine and most specifically Tibetan medicine, specifically the Tibetan 5 elements. Never heard of such a thing ever before. But I hired him to work with me and, you know, help heal my illnesses. And one of the primary therapies he used was this Tibetan 5 element healing system. And he introduced me to these meditation practices, encouraged me to start doing these meditation practices, and started talking with me about the sexual application of this Tibetan 5 element system. Now, keep in mind, I knew very little about Tantra. I was not seeking better sex. I was not looking for orgasms. I didn't know anything about Neo Tantra. I think I'd watched a video like, you know, in my 20s, like a decade ago. My friend's parents showed us this video, and it was like these people dancing and making sounds. Like it just looked like this weird fucking hippie shit to me. And I was like,
Yeah.
not into it. Like these middle-aged hippies doing this weird shit. I was like, not into it. So Tantra was not on my radar. And I didn't know that what he was my naturopath was describing to me was Tantra, right? But he started talking with me about the 5 elements and the sexual application of the 5 elements, et cetera, et cetera. So fast forward, I had massive results from on my health, corrected the illness at the root, which was phenomenal. And I began working with these other meditations. So I had been meditating through this one lineage and this one tradition for a decade up to this point. I was a very devoted practitioner. I meditated a minimum of 4 hours a day. So I was like on point with my spiritual yoga. And so I began introducing these other practices, these 5 element practices into my meditation routine. And the contrast was palpable. My other meditation was very much about disassociating and like leaving the physical realm, which was lovely because my life was kind of shitty. So I really wanted to escape. And these practices, these elemental practices, brought me back to my body, which wasn't always comfortable. But at the time, but the results, like for the first time, I was able to be in front of another person and feel their energy, like actually have an exchange. The other practices I did, I often felt like I was floating above my head, which I also recognize now is a trauma symptom of disassociation, right? So this other meditation practice that I did for a decade reinforced that the trauma response of disassociation. So I was very much floating above the top of my head, like engaging in life. These 5 element practices brought me back into my body in a way that was sustainable and in a way that helped me foster a sense of connection with myself, with anybody that I was in communication with, and in my environment. And that was the first time since I was a very young child that I actually felt connection, like a somatic sense of connection with other human beings. When my healing program with my healer ended, he invited me to train in the sexual application of these 5 element teachings and shared with me that these were these ancient lineage-based methods from the Tibetan tantric tradition that he had received from his Lama Tashi, and invited me to train with him. So my understanding is that he then took it to Lama Tashi and said, "Hey, I want to train with this sexy lady." And Lama Tashi was like, "Okay, you can do that." And so then I began, I shifted my lineage, so to speak. So then I began going to Dharma classes with Lama Tashi and learning Vajrayana Tantric Buddhism, learning Vajrayana Tantra. And then I was also training with my mentor in the sexual application of the 5 elements and also Vajrayana Tantra deity yoga methods. So my training in Tantra was almost like I skipped kindergarten, I skipped grade school, and I went straight to grad school. So I was doing practices that like I probably shouldn't have been doing just because of who I was associated with at the time. But my training went very, very quickly, and it was very intense, very potent, very powerful, and sometimes overwhelming, but profoundly transformational. And for the first time in my lived experience, at the time I would think it was like 33, 34, I began to have an embodied experience of bliss. And at the same time, I also witnessed how all of my childhood trauma had interfered with my ability to connect with my own body, to connect with my sexuality in a healthy way, and to be in a healthy, loving partnership with a man. because I experienced violations, sexual violations as a child, and I was so profoundly wounded. Obviously I'd never done any therapy about it. My therapy was, spiritual bypassing. That was my coping mechanism for most of my adult life. So these practices confronted me, brought me face to face with my legacy of trauma, trauma from this life, trauma from other lives, and gave me powerful tools to transform the pain of that suffering while being held in a container of bliss. That is the potency and power of sexual tantra, is that it creates such a profound container of physiological bliss. There's so much bliss that when your trauma arises, it's like you have an opportunity to focus on the trauma or focus on the bliss. And the bliss is so engaging and so amazing that it's like the trauma arises. It's like, okay, it's there, but I'm going to breathe through and let it go. And there's so much, again, being anchored. There's so much gravity of that bliss that it facilitates the easeful, in many cases, passing of these like horrific events, that are lodged in our body and that are now ready to be released so that we no longer have to carry the baggage of that burden.
Yes.
All that.
Yeah,
that was my journey.
And we're done. Bye. No, just kidding. Don't go. I'm writing notes as you're speaking, so I can go back because you said a lot here, and so I'll go from the bottom and go back up to the top. First of all, the first thing that I want to say is, and I say this to like all of my guests, thank you for doing the work. Thank you for doing the work. Because you had a very awful, traumatic thing happen to you as a child. Should not have happened. That's never okay, right? And, but you might have bypassed for a while. You might have disassociated for a while. You were coping. Like, who the hell has an instruction manual on how to handle sexual abuse as a child? Nobody.
Yeah.
Like, nobody. I'm sorry. And so you did what you thought was best. And so let's just say that, you didn't do anything wrong in any of that. And it led you to a path that was just so wonderfully beautifully spiritual, that led you to be a teacher in this. And I think that's what I want to thank you for is, but even if you didn't ever become a teacher in this, you decided to take the path of healing. And, because there's two paths that we can take when we have shitty things happen to us, right? We can play the victim and be like, well, this bad thing happened to me, and therefore all of my life's problems are everybody else's fault. And I'm never going to take personal responsibility and accountability for my life and blah, 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 right? Like there's a lot of people out there that are like that. And that's okay. That's okay. Right. Because everybody is allowed to be here no matter what, right? And but however, that can almost continue those cycles, right?
Yes, exactly.
That can continue those cycles in a way, whether it's energetically or actually physically, like you then, right? And
become the abuser.
You become the abuser. So I want to thank you first and foremost for choosing the alternative path, and it is alternative, to really learn and grow and be with yourself. So I just want to like anchor in that for a quick second and thank you for that. Yeah, and then okay, so you were saying about this embodied bliss. Okay, bliss is like, you nailed it, because when I was first learning Kundalini Tantra, like I had been meditating. I didn't go through the intense sort of training that you did, like I took a different path. I was like a mom and running a business and working in corporate. And I was very rooted in this 3D reality of like a mortgage and children and that kind of stuff, but I've had this like massive spiritual calling. I've never been to Bali. I've never been to a spiritual retreat. I haven't even been to a live Kundalini or Tantra class. But it's so part of who I am and how I show up that I've like brought it in the corners of my life, and I've learned it as much as possible through online classes with online teachers and things like that, right? So there's no excuse to learn this stuff, right? But I do remember when I was I first started my exposure with just basic meditation, right? That thinking, like you said, that disassociated thinking type of medication, silent meditations, guided meditations, whatever, they were fantastic. I really needed those because it helped open up my intuition. It helped me understand that there was access to higher levels of consciousness. It made me more aware of my thinking. It made me more aware of a whole bunch of things. And then like through that, I started journaling, and I've got like 2.5 years of journals where I was just like downloading like everything and sketching my life as I know it today. And I've never done that since.
Wow.
But then something needed to shift. I needed to get into my body. And so I was started to get introduced to other things. I started to get introduced to goddess flow. And then that eventually, like, so that brought me into my body and talk about dance. I love dancing. Not a professional by any means. But then that like brought me to the word Kundalini and Kundalini Tantra. And I didn't know where it came from. I didn't know what it was. And I just like, again, I put something out on Facebook. I'm like, does anybody know anything about this? Like, what is, like, I tried Googling it, like nothing happened. And then finally one day I'd posted it like a couple of times. And then finally I posted it, and I got connected with one teacher who then connected me with another teacher, which then what brought me into the understanding and the learning of it and classes. And that is when I finally started to understand what you talked about, which is embodied bliss.
Yeah.
And that's a long way of saying it's this sensation for me. I'll explain it, but it's this sensation of like effervescent, it's like champagne, it's like the Mona Lisa smile. It's like very uplifty. It's a very uplifty type of energy. It's not heavy. It's like, oh my God, it's reverent, and palpable. It's a real palpable energy. And we've all felt this in one shape or form, right? Whenever we get excited about something or whatever. But what you're speaking to is, we've all felt bliss, but what you're speaking to is embodied bliss, which means that this is something that doesn't just go away. It's not situational dependent, right? It's not like, oh, I just had this experience and now I feel bliss. It's like, no, I just am bliss.
Yes.
Right?
Correct.
It can't be taken away from you once you feel it.
Yes. Yep.
Right?
Yep. And it's our birthright. Precisely.
And so just like that. So what I was thinking when you were talking about when those traumas were coming up for you after you'd experienced this other level of embodiment, it was what word came to me was healthy disassociation.
Yeah. Or differentiation, I would say. Not differentiation. It's like,
right.
When I'm already feeling overwhelmed and suffering and my trauma comes up, it's like I am my trauma, right? But when I'm resting in this container of open, expansive, blissful awareness and the trauma comes up, it's like I am bliss. I'm not the trauma. So I can see it, I can witness it, I can honor it, and I can effortlessly let it go.
Yeah.
Because if it's coming up, it's because it's ready to be acknowledged and transformed. That's the only reason it's showing its face.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so like we in this podcast, I talk a lot about like somatic work, right? And so somatic is of the body. Right? And so that's what you're talking about. That's what Tantra is more. It is actually somatic work in a way, because it especially in the sexual realm, but like even with just movement and the movements that come within certain containers, and being present in your body and being here, as opposed to that like mind meditation that does take you out of it.
Tantra is the original somatics. I mean, somatics was born out of yoga. Somatics was born out of Tantra yoga. So Tantra is the original somatic experiencing. And that is
The
the original.
It's the OG.
Yep. The goat. Tantra is the goat of somatic experiencing. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, in the modern world, we're like, oh, somatics. In the ancient world where Tantra came from, like, they had different traumas. It was, I mean, I don't even think we can fathom how different the culture was. I mean, look at technology, right? You're 49, I'm 50, and how our culture and society has changed in the last 15 years as a result of smartphones and
Yeah.
this kind of technology. It's completely transformed our culture and our society at large. So in terms of embodiment, like, rewind 2000 years ago, I really don't think those folks were struggling with or dealing or having to deal with the same level of disassociation and disembodiment that we do in the modern time.
Oh, 100%, and I know my kids are going to be experiencing a whole new level of stuff, because of,
Right?
you know,
AI.
AI and being like on computers all the time. And anyway, we'll put a pin in that conversation.
Yeah.
Because I want to come back to um your expertise for a quick moment here. You know, uh your bio was, oh, I've lost it here. Hang on, let me just open it back up again. Um your bio was pretty impressive, and there's the books that you have written, which are awesome. But what I wanted to like talk about here is how you've been, featured in Cosmopolitan magazines, right? Cosmopolitan, Ebony, like on Playboy Radio, Men's Health magazine, CBS, NBC, Rogers, like all sorts of um, media, mainstream media. And like kudos, because this is a conversation that needs to be brought mainstream, but there's a misunderstanding of what tantra is. So before we go into your credentials there and your media and bringing this to the masses, can you define tantra, please?
No. No.
Perfect answer.
Nope.
Nope.
Because what tantra is
I love
is
that.
dependent upon the lineage and tradition of practice. So you practice Kundalini Tantra. Your definition of Tantra is going to be totally different than the definition for Vajrayana Tantra, which is going to be totally different than the definition for classical Hindu Tantra, which is, I mean, it's just depending on your lineage of practice and your teacher. My guru, my teacher, has informed my lens of practice so much. He's very rooted in humanity. He's been a householder. He's not a monk, right? So my Lama has been a householder, not a monk. So that's informed and colored the lens through which I view Tantra as an application for our daily life, as a way of improving our relationship with our environment, with our families, with ourselves, as a way of increasing health and wellness, as a way of cultivating peace and equanimity and joy and bliss in our everyday existence. That's a very different orientation and definition from, someone who practices in a monastery, so to speak. So I don't think I shy away from anyone who's like, this is what Tantra is, because it's so lineage specific. So lineage specific. So for example, in our lineage, the first definition of Tantra I was given was Tantra literally means to weave light and sound with form. And it's referring to a yogic method that we use in Vajrayana Tantra of visualizing light, visualizing ourselves as bodies of light, as the deity, sound, which is mantra that we're chanting repeatedly, and form, which is the body. If our practice does not include weaving light and sound with form, then we're not practicing Tantra. And yet there can be sutras and texts, I have several behind me, that are referred to as tantras or tantra, right? So, and that's my little tiny minuscule understanding. So if you ask a monk what their definition of tantra is, they could give you multiple different definitions, most likely, right? So I think I think the question of what is Tantra is loaded, and I don't really think that any one practitioner can answer that effectively unless they are like an ordained teacher of a specific lineage. Then I would trust their answer.
Yeah, fair. And I really appreciate you saying no, and then saying why no,
Mhm.
because um you're right. It is, there is no actual definition of it. And I think, like, for me, what my understanding of it is based on what, like, the practices that I've done, which, again, like I said, these were just like online classes, you know what I mean? They were with somebody who had studied Kundalini Tantra, like in India, and all of that. So there was a lineage that was brought down through that, and there is lineage here. There is definitely lineages that come down. Um, and what I understood it to be was sort of almost more the structure, right? Which is kind of like what you said, right? It's the light, it's the sound, it's the movement, right? And it's the same thing. That's almost like how I learned it too. Was like the connection to, our chakra system, and the connection to our energetic body, right? The connection, and then how mantra connects to that, and then how movement connects to that, right? So all three of those in the practices that I've partaken in are present as well, right? So it's almost like it's a structure, and then within that structure is the lineage, right? And that's like how, like, and so in Kundalini, it's awakening the power of Kundalini within you, which is basically life force. And it's the same thing, like you're talking light, we say life force, whatever, right? Like, I think it's the same words to describe the same, there are different words to describe the same thing almost, in a way. But that's like the extent of my knowledge, so I'm not gonna like try to define it anymore. But I think like too many people think it's just about sex, and that's why I wanted to address.
Define that. I would
Yeah.
say if I were going to define Tantra, I would say it's a spiritual path, right? It's like, to me, it's not a practice. I mean, it includes practices. It's not a practice. It's not a, hobby. It's not a business. It's not a profession. It's a spiritual path. And when folks, I think that I will say that that's the piece that I see missing in the mainstream. They're like, "Oh, I'm going to have tantric sex." Well, what does that even mean? What does that mean to you? What does it mean to have tantric sex? So most people are talking about just having like connected sex, and they call that tantra. Tantra is a spiritual tradition, regardless of what, umbrella or lineage you're practicing under. It is a spiritual tradition. It is a way of accessing and weaving in our inherent spiritual consciousness in every single moment, in every single breath. It's the piece that's been left out of modern society. God, spirit, our divine essence. That's not included in the whole picture. So for me, that is like my spiritual yoga, my spiritual practice, my spiritual path is number one. That is what I am rooted in. And then all of my life revolves around that spiritual discipline. That's what Tantra is for me. It's an anchor, it's a root, it's a steel rebar thing into the foundation of my life. And it gives meaning to every aspect of my life. And it's a lens through which I view the world. I view the world through the lens of the five elements and Vajrayana Tantra. And everything that occurs in my life is viewed through that lens. So, for example, my house burned down in Canada in 2023 in the McDougall Creek wildfires. It was horrible. It was traumatic. It was also fucking liberating because we had been talking about moving. We had actually, we were actually putting our house on the market when it burned down. And so instead of like our house burning down and it being devastating, end of the world, why did this happen to me? It's such bad karma. It was like, holy shit, that was like intense and like traumatic, but look what it's opened up. It was actually a pathway of transformation and a portal into an entire new way of living my life. So, I was able to view one of the most profound tragedies of my life through the lens of Tantra. And instead of just seeing it as traumatic, I saw it as transformational. And that's the lens I bring to all of existence. And it's a lens that is honed and cultivated every day through our practice. The purpose of practice is the result that we get. I practice so that I experience more bliss, equanimity, openness, joy, and clarity in every aspect of my life. I practice because I love the practice, but mostly I practice because I love the result of the practice.
Yeah, right. The result. Yeah. It's so beautiful. And that transformation, like that transformation piece, because it is that. And so that's what I'm hearing you say is it's a lens, it's a structure, it's a way of seeing the world, it's a way of transforming things, into other things. It's alchemy.
It's alchemy. It's a way of
Yeah.
transforming our pain into power.
Yeah.
It's alchemy. Yeah.
Yeah. And bliss into more bliss.
Yeah, and bliss, and again, bliss. Like I used to think that bliss was. I used to think that bliss was disassociation. I thought bliss was up here, and embodied bliss is like it's.
Mm.
In the past, I would have said, "Oh, that's bliss," but now it's so fucking normal. It's so normal. It's,
Yeah.
it's just it's without that inner conflict. I remember the inner dialogue and all the battles I used to fight with myself and other people in my own head. And it's the absence of that is bliss. It's the absence of being in conflict with ourselves. It's the absence of internal conflict. That is bliss.
Oh yeah. Yeah, let's be with that for a second. The absence of internal conflict.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know. It's so wonderful. And meditation does help us with that, because meditation allows for us to become present to that conflict,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, to become conscious of that conflict, to become conscious of the fact that we have a voice in our head that isn't quite us, and all of that, and that's the first step. And then from there you can start to let that go, and then like, yeah, eventually you do sit and there is no voices in your head that are just
Mhm.
like trying to ruin your life.
And transform that energy. That's the beautiful thing about specifically the five elements is they address the five root poisons of anger, attachment, pride, jealousy, and ignorance, right? So those voices in our head are expressions of anger, attachment, pride, jealousy, and ignorance. That's what they
Yeah,
are, yammering away.
right.
So there are specific tantra yoga practices that we can work with, like the five elements, that actually help transform those emotional poisons at the root. And so it dissolves the root cause of those voices. Those voices are usually they're trauma responses. They're usually, our parents' voices or our teachers' voices, or they're usually voices telling us why we're unlovable.
Yeah,
Right? Hmm.
right. Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay, so let's loop back for a quick second about bringing this mainstream. So
Yeah.
like, tell me about like these platforms that you were on and how you were received, and like what came out of all of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been an evolution, right? So I've been doing this. I've started training in 2008. I think I really, some of my media credits happened back in 2013, so like over a decade ago. And I will say that how I share and what I say about Tantra has evolved over the last 15 years as I've evolved over the last 15 years. And what I will say about most of these mainstream things is they very much were interested in the sexology. They were very much interested in the sexuality of it. And so I did my best in like intersecting that, it's not all about sex. And, here's this spiritual component, and it's about the weaving of the spirituality or the application of these spiritual yogas to the sexual experience. So I did the best that I could at the time. I would say I was fairly successful in my most recent publication. So the Cosmo Bridgerton articles, they wanted to talk with me about Bridgerton and the tantra, particularly the second season of it, where they wove some tantra stuff in there, or appeared to weave some tantra stuff in there. And so I felt very proud of the way that I was able to talk about the roots of tantra. And I actually brought another practitioner in who from a Hindu tradition to directly address that as well, since I'm not trained in the Hindu tradition. So, but I feel we did a good job together of explaining, what tantric sex is and what aspects of Bridgerton, were pointing to something tantra, actual authentically tantra, and which aspects were more just, the sensationalization of tantra. And then on the love and hip hop episode, they brought me in to support the couples by sharing some tantra practices with them, and I feel that I did a very good job of helping these couples really anchor into their heart and get present with themselves. And I would say that the most, I would say, the most salient thing about teaching tantra is teaching to our audience, right? And so, and being in integrity with ourselves. So for me, tantra is my spiritual path. So I'm going to talk about spirituality, but not everybody, some folks don't want to access tantra as a spiritual path. Sometimes they're just like, I just want to feel better in my body. Right. So it's really about being able to distill the information to meet the student where they're at, and kind of like plant seeds that will bear fruit, will root and sprout and bear fruit, whether it's in this lifetime or another lifetime. So bringing tantra to mainstream, depends on the person and their lineage, and it also depends on the audience.
Yeah, I think you need to be ready for this for sure. And I'd written that down a couple of times when you were speaking, like when the student is ready, the teacher appears, because you were mentioning about how you'd gone, like you did this like crash course, and like, you went to a graduate school or whatever you said, you skipped kindergarten and all that. But I think, like, I don't know that you did skip anything, because you'd spent so much time, like being a monk and being, exposed to spirituality. It was just on a different channel, you just changed
Yep.
the channel in a way.
Yep.
So well, let's bring this a little bit mainstream, for anybody, watching and listening right now, who's like leaning in and like, okay, well, this is exciting to me, I want to know more about this. Like, what is a couple things that, like, breath work is a big part.
Mhm.
On this side, I don't know how much breath work plays in
Mhm.
what it is, how you practice. You had some spiritual imagery on your Zoom screen that I was just like, dang, I love that. We were going to show that.
Yep.
You've got some beautiful imagery behind you there. And then there's the mantras, and then there's the movement. And is there anything that, like, any couple of quick things that you could share, maybe from the 5 elements or whatnot, that might help somebody listening or watching kind of really get a flavor of this?
Yeah. So we work, because we have to translate this into a Western modern lens. We work with something called the 4 pillars of healing. And the 4 pillars of healing are meditation, movement, connection, and pleasure. So that's a really beautiful way of simplifying these, esoteric, blah, blah, blah. What are we doing? We're gonna meditate. And there's multiple levels of meditation. So sometimes we use movement as a meditation. Sometimes we use yogic breathing as a meditation. Sometimes we sit with our spine straight and follow our breath and that's our meditation. Sometimes we visualize and chant and use that as a meditation. So it's really about layering each practice upon the next. And truly, it's also about preparing the nervous system. So, for example, when I first started meditation practices, 25 years ago, I had so much trauma in my body, so much unresolved trauma in my body, that sitting down and following 10 breaths felt like torture. It was
Oh yeah.
excruciating, because the
Right.
moment I got present with my breath, I felt all that anxiety. I felt all of that unprocessed activation, and I didn't know what to do with it. So it was overwhelming. So I hated meditating when I first started. It was like torture. But moving and breath, and using my breath, like combining my breath with the movement and using that as a portal into a meditative state of consciousness, was highly effective for me, because the meditation allowed me to encounter that activation and then move it out of my body, and then feel that activation with my breath and then move it out of my body. So depending again on how much active and unresolved trauma a student has in their body, that's going to determine how we apply the methods. For a student that's done a lot of work already, they've done a lot of excavation, they don't have a lot of activated trauma, obvious in the nervous system, they may be able to sit down and do 21 breaths and visualize and chant, no problem. Again, but for another student who has residue and that charge is still too activated, they may need to do journaling. They may need to do another pathway. So that's why I love the 4 pillars, because the 4 pillars are each a different pathway of addressing the root cause of our suffering from all these different avenues using different methods that are going to be pleasurable. So this is where the pleasure is medicine, which is a term that I coined back in 2011, because it truly is, particularly for those of us who are trauma survivors. We don't need more violence. We don't need to bully ourselves into healing. Like, we don't need any more negative, critical voices in our head about how we're not good enough. What we need to do is finally fucking feel good and safe and at home in our bodies again. So really leaning into the tool of pleasure as medicine. And at the Institute, we teach about the 4 different forms of pleasure. Actually, my students have informed me, Davey, there's actually 5. You've left one out, so I'll circle back to that. But the 4 forms of pleasure that we work with are physical, sensual pleasure. Again, sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. Good food, good visuals, good smells, ooh, good touch. So just that physical, sensual experience of feeling good in the body, that's a pleasure we can lean into. Emotional pleasure, these relationships which nourish us and feed us, these connections that are delicious, these podcasts with such great information. These are ways we can access emotional pleasure, upliftment. Spiritual pleasure, those experiences that help us feel connected to something greater. And for me, walking in the jungle, walking in the woods, where there is no ego, there's not even a Devi. It's just this consciousness encountering this consciousness when I'm walking in the jungle. So these experiences that we have in life that help us dissolve the ego and feel connected to something greater. And then, of course, there's sexual pleasure, which is its own distinct form of pleasure. I can have all kinds of, good physical sensations, but that's not the same as sexual pleasure, a sexual sensation. And sexual pleasure opens up a portal into a whole different realm of consciousness. That's why its own form of pleasure. And then my students have let me know that there's actually conceptual pleasure as well. So these things that stimulate our minds and our imagination, and again, help us feel like, I don't know, like that satisfaction when all the pieces are clicking into place, or when we get downloads, right? When it's like, all the juices are flowing and boom, 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 the puzzle pieces are falling into alignment. Conceptual pleasure as well. So, in terms of making tantra mainstream and accessible, that's the structure that we use, these 4 pillars, really leaning into pleasure, these different forms of pleasure, to help us soothe and connect and feel good in our bodies, so then we can start to cultivate and grow and evolve and learn.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I love that. I say you can like, I call it like ritual roulette, right? Where it's like because I am very fluid with my practices. I'm very fluid. I don't do the same thing every day, but I do something every day. And my clients are usually like these type A, like rigid, they're rigid. And because they haven't been exposed to this yet. And they're called to it. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm so like stuck and I want to feel more flowy. I want to feel more open. I want to feel more soft, right? And so they get that vibration. They see that from women like you and women like me, and they're just like, what is that? And that and then so I'm not going to then like layer on top of that more rigidity, like
Exactly.
discipline isn't a dirty word. Discipline is like being devoted to something daily or as often as possible, but it doesn't have to be that same like rigid like thing that you're doing, unless that actually brings you joy. Right. If that brings pleasure, then by all means. But there are so many different, like you said, when you were talking about meditation too, I was casting my mind back to years ago when I used to run this program called Feminine Rising. And I had like wonderful, amazing women in this program, and we were talking about femininity and boundaries and people pleasing and speaking your truth and opening up your throat and like all sorts of stuff. And and meditation and mindfulness, and for some of these women it was sort of almost an intro. And we discovered that things like knitting or crocheting or coloring or whatever, like it wasn't just like sitting and meditating. It was
Yeah.
like it can be anything.
Yes.
It's the mindfulness that's attached to that. It's the intention that's attached to that, right?
Yes.
And I love and you're right, like the movement. There's like and you talked about nervous system regulation too, like in the tantra that I learned as well, like we can do shaking, right? Where
Yes.
you're shaking the body, and
Yep.
it might look crazy, but it's not. It's
Mhm.
literally like, just get this off me kind of thing, like
Mhm.
move it around, like
Mhm.
I don't want it to be sticky anymore. I
Yep.
give it back, I give it
Yep.
back to earth, right?
Mhm.
And so that's even a form of movement,
Absolutely.
and which is also meditative, which is also pleasurable.
Exactly. Exactly.
All
And
one.
and the thing about pleasure, like I think in many spiritual traditions, pleasure has gotten a bad rap, right?
Yeah,
Because, pleasure is going to lead you astray and it's going to take you down, the desire realm and all of that. And that's an unhealthy expression of
totally.
pleasure. But
I'm
but
making a face.
pleasure is part of the human blueprint. Like we're not going to eat poop
Yeah,
because it smells bad and it tastes bad. We're literally wired to so
yeah,
that we know that pleasure is sustainable for life, and
yeah,
pain means stop.
yeah.
Right? And so having a practice that's rooted in pleasure and enjoyment, a friend of mine, Trina McGee, calls it a blisscipline, right? So discipline has
Oh,
gotten a bad rap. So we'll give her credit. Trina
yeah,
McGee, she calls it
yeah.
blisscipline. It's our blisscipline. So and I think they talk about it in Vedic Tantra as bhakti, devotion, right? So we don't practice because we're trying to beat ourselves into submission, fuck you, you traumatized little, whatever, get in shape, like boot camp, right? I did
Yeah.
that before and doesn't work. But doing it because we love, if we don't love the practice, we love the results of the practice, right? That devotion has to be there. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. And also, like, I've heard my lama say, I've heard other lamas say, I've read it in books, like, love is the heart and soul of Tantra. If there is no love, there is no Tantra.
Mhm.
Right. And so our practice must be rooted in a foundation of love, right? Love for the practice, devotion for the teachers, devotion for the practice, and a true desire for the well-being of ourselves and our community, our sangha, our human family.
Yeah. Yeah, and self-love. Yeah, I would have to say that this practice probably opened up self-love more than anything. More than
Yeah,
anything.
yeah,
It helped me identify as a very powerful being,
yeah.
and like see that, and I'd already done like a ton of trauma work and had become aware of my traumas and how they were showing up, and you know like a lot of that I'd already done a lot of that work. And so by the time I got to tantra, it was less about those traumas coming up for me, although they did still. But it was less about that, like if I'm comparing to like some of the other students that I was studying with, for example, some of them hadn't seen some of their stuff yet. And so witnessing how that was showing up for some people versus like people who had already
Mhm.
recognized and seen the traumas and been with it. But what it did is it allowed me to be able to um, love myself,
Yes,
you know?
exactly.
Yeah, because I was
Exactly.
like still self-critical and beating myself up, and I didn't really carry a lot. I didn't carry shame, but I carried very, very, very low self-esteem.
Yeah.
I didn't think I was lovable. I was just like, nobody loves me. And that was like the story forever.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I was like, well, I love me. I'm pretty fucking cool. you
Yeah.
know? And so that these practices enabled me to feel more into that, you know,
Yeah.
for myself.
Yeah.
And then like I was sharing before, like that bliss, you know, like, oh my God, yeah, man. Like, and so my life became very orgasmic
Yeah.
before I started actually having orgasms. So like my sexual lineage story, my actual physical 3D story in that didn't even begin until like recently. Even though
Wow.
I'm a very sexual woman, I'm a very sensual woman, in my 3D realm, I hadn't actually ever like really experienced that until like recent history, you know? But so I experienced like the um those other types of pleasure, those other types of bliss, you know, lots of downloads, lots of idea generating, you know, I've been in entrepreneurial communities forever, and it's just like, this is that connection, right? Like you
Yeah.
said. And then like just like the reverence, like I'm in Vancouver now, from Toronto, you're BC. You lived in the mountains, right? I see the mountain right now and the ocean, and it's just like, what the fuck is that? My friend and I yesterday, we were talking about it. He's from Toronto, I'm from Toronto. And he was just like, I'm like motorboating the mountains, you know? It was hilarious the way he was describing it. Like he's just so like, oh,
Yeah.
reverent of this, you know? And that's
Gorgeousness.
the
Yeah.
gorgeousness of it, you know? And that's bliss, that's
Yeah.
reverence, that's all of that.
Yeah.
And so all of that started to occur. And then it was like, oh, I am bliss, I am
Yeah.
beautiful, I am, you know, these things. And I can see the love that I bring to my friends, I can see the love that I bring to my children, I can see the love that I palpate out. And then from there I came up with this term called goddess currency, which is basically like
Yeah.
when you're vibrating at this level, when you're in that blissed out space, not to be confused with, you know, like heavily drugged. You know, I've been accused of
Yeah.
that. Actually, my girlfriend and I used to be like, oh, you guys are so drunk. And we were like, we haven't touched anything. No, this is happiness. This is bliss, you know? And then I started to notice as I was going out in the public, right? Dealing with like bank tellers, grocery store clerks, whatever, that there was this like vibration that was like coming
Yeah.
out. And then I started getting all of these free things. And I was just like, whoa, what's happening here? And so that's why I called it goddess currency,
Goddess
because it's this
currency.
currency, right? And the men love that too. Whenever I share it with guys, with dudes, they're like, oh yeah, I like that. I'm taking that one, but they call it God currency.
But that energy exchange is what you're describing, right? And what we put out, having that return to us 100-fold. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, for sure, for sure. So okay, I love this whole entire topic, because we've gone from, you know, there's this trauma point in your life that you experienced that led you very, very, very deeply and profoundly onto the spiritual path. And you are for sure a spiritual guide, you know, you're it's palpable, you know. And but even that brought you to, you know, one sort of lineage, I guess, if you will, to use some of your language, of spirituality that was almost individualistic in a way, right?
Yes. Yes.
But then your calling wasn't that, because you could have stayed there,
Hmm.
you know, but your calling was more about the exposure, you know, to others and community and sharing of it. And so, you know, you needed to come across to another path, and
Yeah.
then have this like toolbox, if you will, you know, with this 5 elements and these like ways, the structure, so that like people can understand it and wrap their head around it more.
Can access it. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
make good use of it, because like, what's the point of Tantra if it's not transforming your life and making it better? There's
Right.
no purpose, right? Why bother?
Right. Yeah. And I think, but I think like just by default, you know, like if you just start practicing, it will just start making your life better. Like it, you know, whatever, it just will like just happen
Yeah.
organically.
I mean, that's my belief. And what we found though is, like, again, with Tantra, finding the umbrella that's correct for you, because there are some folks that have come under our umbrella, and sometimes it's too intense for people, or it might not be the right lineage, right? Maybe it's, you need a different emanation, you need a different vibe, you need a different ray, so to speak. And no shame, no shade. That's cool. Like, not everyone's attracted to Tibetan 5-element Tantra, like, and that's cool. You're not supposed to be. Right? Not everyone is supposed to be. Some folks are very, very attracted to like Kundalini Tantra. And if that's where you're finding your transformation and healing, amazing. That's amazing. So, I really feel with Tantra specifically is aligning with the tradition that is correct for you, even if that's Neo Tantra. Like, find a Neo Tantra. I don't have good things to say about Neo Tantra. I'm not a Neo Tantra fan, but find a teacher or a school or people that resonate, that demonstrate the same ethical values that you have, and go play in that space. If the Tantra is for you, sexual awakening and sex, that good, then wonderful, then play there, enjoy there, use that energy for, to nourish you, to fill up your cup, to transform and heal, and just ensure you're doing it under an umbrella of ethics and healthy structure, because there's a lot of abuse in Neo Tantra, and there's reasons that there's a lot of abuse in Neo Tantra. So I really invite students to be discerning when you're playing in the realm of Neo Tantra, because there is no governance. Nobody answers to anything other than their own ego. In Neo Tantra, there are no Lama gurus, there is no lineage. And so there's a lot of room and space for harm and abuse to occur. And it does occur a lot.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. That's really unfortunate. Thank you for that warning. And I want to piggyback on that, because I remember now this conversation is reminding me of some of the things that my teacher taught me, like with the Kundalini. It's about like certain like breath pumps that you do, like, pumping the oxygen, the energy up the body, right? So it goes from that root chakra all the way up. But what he taught us and what we learn is that we have to open up that third eye at the same time of the root, because that if your third eye is closed, meaning that you're too closed to see what needs to be seen, i.e. trauma or whatever, and you're pumping that energy up, you're forcing life force, right? You're forcing yourself to see things that you're not ready. And this is why some people can actually go a little like cuckoo, in it, because they haven't been guided properly. They haven't been guided properly, right? And so there are misconceptions, there are bad reputations where it comes to this stuff, because of practitioners or practices or whatever that aren't cautious of how these kinds of things can work in the body and work in the mind, and you know what I mean, and then to your point about maybe some people just not being ethically aligned in some of those practices. So I agree with you. Like, if you are practicing anything, no matter what it is, any kind of religion or spiritual practice or anything like that, if something feels off, it probably is, and trust your freaking gut. Trust it. And you don't have to like confront the person or whatever. You can just leave. Like, spirituality is like, it's everywhere. It's such a oneness. It's such an anything that you could even create your own. Like, there's no like one pathway to this, it's like whatever you believe and whatever feels good for you. And if you are in something that doesn't feel good, then you just walk away. Like, it's not the one and only.
Yeah, and especially in the realm of, again, like spiritual wellness, sexual wellness, alternative wellness, holistic healing, I'm not a fan of big government, like whatever government is what it is. And I will say that there is a role that it plays in terms of regulation and having ethical standards and ethical boundaries. And a lot of, spiritual wellness, like all these wellness things, because there is no governance, right? It
Yeah.
leaves the door open for a lot of, people to just make up their own shit,
Yeah.
which, ultimately, yay, but relatively, again, there's just a lot of room for a lot of harm.
Mhm.
And there has been. I mean, I think it speaks for itself. Like, I Google like harm in the tantra community or harm in the field of sexology, and like you'll get multiple articles. There's an author, B. Schofield, I think their name is, and they write often about, they expose these gurus and they expose these cult members, and usually they're the, tantra people or sexology people or wellness people that have millions of followers and are abusing people, right? Or abuse is prolific. So, yeah, I don't know, that was kind of a tangent, but just encouraging, just talking to the point that it's wise to be discerning when we're playing in the realm of unregulated industries. Discernment is key.
Mhm.
And like you said, our best tool for discernment is trusting our gut, our own
Mhm.
bodies. And that's where meditation, movement, connection, pleasure really come in, because
Yeah.
they bring us home to the body, and they
Mhm.
give us a contrast between feeling good and safe and regulated and dysregulated, right? It gives us a very visceral embodied experience of what a relaxed and balanced nervous system feels like, as opposed to an activated or a shut down nervous system, right?
Mhm.
And having a guide that can help you navigate that field between activation, disassociation, and okay, regulation, right? And
Mhm.
can mirror that for you and can kind of hold that space. And what is that, the reflex, like mirror neurons, right? Is
Yeah.
we reflex to each other, so giving you an anchor point as you navigate this experience and find your own ground and your own route.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Um, oh my gosh, I we could keep talking forever and ever and ever, I'm sure. Um, but if you were to what parting thoughts do you have for our listeners and watchers today?
Yeah, parting words. So I would say, if you're interested in tantra, I really encourage you to do your research and explore, research tantric Buddhist tantra, or Buddhist Tantra, research Hindu Tantra, research Neo Tantra, research Kundalini Tantra, read about it. It doesn't mean you've got to like dive in. I'm like a Gemini rising with a Scorpio sun. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to research, I'm going to like explore, don't have to dive that deep, but read, learn a little bit about these different pathways and see which one lights you up, because that is your spirit calling you home. Right, that's a signpost, like, oh, this moves me, this inspires me, I want to move towards this. That's your soul calling you home, right? That's your path. And so when you feel that, then explore, who are the teachers of this? And do I resonate with the teacher? Right. So Tantra flows between one human heart and another. And that relationship between teacher and student we describe as samaya, right? Meaning it's a karmic relationship, it's a sacred relationship, and it's an important relationship. So feeling that resonance, feeling that samaya, doesn't mean your teacher is your guru. I think that's dangerous in the West, but there must be that respect, mutual respect. It's just as important for your teacher to respect you as it is for you to respect your teacher, right? But so it goes both ways, mutual respect, because that's how the wisdom flows, right? Again, it's anchored and rooted in love, acceptance, non-judgmental mind, allowance. That's key. So find yourself a teacher. Find yourself a teacher that you resonate with, not just one who's got a lot of followers. A lot of followers it means you've got money for PR. And that's great. Bless your heart, bless your spirit. But that doesn't always mean that just because someone has a million followers doesn't mean that they're the right teacher for you, right? So allow yourself to trust your body in terms of, when you're exploring teachers, who do you notice like an upliftment or a light, and who do you notice like, ooh, no go, or even just neutral. Neutral may mean no go for now, right? So those are the parting words. Like Tantra, it is a spiritual tradition, even though it's been, it turned into what it is here in the West. That doesn't mean that it's not a spiritual tradition at the root. And spirituality is something that we deserve to be mindful of and discerning of. And it is spirituality is about reclaiming the totality of our humanity. And that is important. and impactful. And we deserve to spend time doing that. And we deserve to align with a path and a school and a teacher that actually works for us, that is actually devoted to our growth and evolution, and not someone there who's just to exploit and abuse you, because that's shitty.
Yeah.
So that's my spiel.
Good. I love it. That's perfect parting thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for making it real and accessible and ethical. And thank you for your devotion and for being a guide and helping us see, what could be seen, yeah, I really appreciate you being here. So how can people reach you?
Well, we have a great website called authentictantra.com. We were able to nab that back in
Wow.
2011, and it stands true today, authentictantra.com. We specialize in teaching the Tibetan 5-element practices, meditations, movements, all sorts of things. We have a resident Lama and spiritual director of the Institute, our root Lama, Lama Tashi Dundrup, who is available for questions about your practice, which I think is very special. And as I said before, we are the only government accredited school for tantric sexual healing in the world. And so the focus of our work is, yes, spirituality, but it's the spiritual application to our sexuality. So it's about reincorporating our sexuality into, again, our experience of our humanity, so we can be full and complete and total humans, nothing left out. And it's a way of, truly cultivating devotion. So whether we're washing the dishes or, making love or driving the kids to school, it's about giving us tools to ground in our ultimate nature and our ultimate essence, our divine essence, which is embodied bliss.
Mm-hmm. I love it. What was that website again?
Authentictantra.com.
There you go.
And we have lots of free stuff. So sign up for our free stuff.
Yay. And you really live up to that. Thank you. Thank you for that. One of my goals for this podcast is to bring people who are so rooted in authenticity, not to use that overused word, but really, like, there's integrity is very, very, very important to me. And when I do business development for companies, for example, like, I have to make sure that what we're saying is what's happening behind the scenes. It's
Yes.
very important to me. And so I can't sell ice to Eskimos because that's out of integrity to me.
Yep.
Like, I
Yeah,
could
I hear that.
technically, like, I'm not good, but quote unquote, but I would never sell ice to Eskimos because they already have it and they don't need it.
Exactly. Yes,
Sell ice
exactly.
to menopausal women who are experiencing hot flashes.
There we go.
Right? Let's be integrous here.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I so appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. Yeah, I hopefully a lot of people will visit your website and learn more about how you can help people just connect with who they are at this level. So I really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor and a gift.
Yeah. And thank you to you, the listener and watcher of The Dirt and the Divine. I really appreciate you being here. Please, go check out that website and learn more about Tantra and these spiritual practices that really can make a profound difference in how you heal and how you relate to life and how you relate to yourself and how you relate to others. And if Tantra is not the path, that's totally cool. There's many, many, many more. If you would like to learn more about me, please go visit krishayoung.com. You can find me on Instagram at the Krisha Young and Facebook Krisha Young. Basically, as the kids say, just search up Krisha Young and you'll be able to find me and follow, like, subscribe for more episodes. And I will see you in the next episode. Thank you so much.